I'm James Wisner. I am a lifetime member of the American Custom Gunmakers Guild. I joined the Guild in 1986, and there's a story behind that. But we'll digress. I first made my first gun stock was made when I was 11 years old. Grew up in a gun shop. We got more involved in the gunsmithing in the early 70s, 73, 74. Again, I was making a tremendous amount of gun stocks as a teenager. There was very little parts to be had available then in the 70s. And so what little we didn't have, we had to make. That evolved to where I actually met Al Lind about 1976. Had him pantograph a couple stocks for me, actually. And the shop kept expanding, got bigger. More people got aware of the custom stocks I was doing and also the metalwork. So the 1985 NRA convention was in Seattle. We got a booth up there, and we were working on several guns for an outfitter in Alaska. And partway through the first day of the show, this little gray-haired guy come over, and he was asking me all these very pointed questions about the metalwork I was doing. It was Herman Waldron. And before he left, he goes, "I will be back with somebody else and the paperwork. I want you to join the Guild." But I had already heard about the Guild shortly before that, because it had only been formed in '83, if I recall. Read about it. So I was interested. Al then come over shortly, looked my work over, signed me off. Morris Ottmar come over shortly after that, signed me off, and then I come down to Las Vegas in the spring of '86 and put my work up for vote for the Guild and was allowed to join. Because I was doing more metalwork then in the '80s, and I took a hard look when I joined. My stock work was good, but it wasn't up to par with the members of the Guild. But the metalwork was, and there was not that many metalsmiths in 1986. Pete Gristle was the main one. Don Allen was doing a little bit, but so I got into making custom parts, and it just blossomed from there. Times have changed. After 9/11, the custom metal parts went down the drain. So I went to work for my parents again, and he was doing reproduction parts. They wanted to retire, so my wife and I bought them out in 2004. So we run Wisner's Inc. Lots of reproduction parts. We have about 700 line items from Browning to Winchester. Screws, firing pins, lock and blocks, carriers, like you saw a little bit ago. A lot of reproduction parts. As the last few years allowed me to get back into the custom metalwork. Doing that basically evenings and weekends. Starting to make safeties again. Starting to do other custom parts, band ramps, rear sight sleeves, swivels. A lot of more custom parts as time allows. A complete job is nice, but I do a lot of just barreled actions. My personal preference is Mausers. I've done Enfields, Model 70s, Ruger number 1s, left-hand Zosta Mausers. A little bit of everything over the years, as far as a lot of different work. And it can be anywhere from just putting the barrel on to a complete ensemble. I mean, new trigger guard, action conversion, safety, bow handle, barrel, quarter rib, full blown. It just depends on what the customer wants.
And that's your favorite kind of work?
Yeah, a little bit of spice in life goes a long ways. So a little change every time is nice, rather than trying to do the same thing time after time after time. Currently, I got one in that he supplied all the parts but the safety. It's going to be an open-sided 35 Whelen. He supplied a peep sight that goes on the cocking piece. I just finished up a 9.3 by 62. It has a rear sight sleeve island, front sight that I made. I had to modify the trigger guard to hold 5 rounds in it. One of my safeties on it. I've got another one I'm working on. It's a 375 H&H. It's going to have New England custom sights, just an island, and modify the trigger guard again and a safety. It's pretty simple, straightforward on that. So there's a little bit of everything. Every job's different. I even have I'm working on is a Savage 99C. So that's the detachable clip one. He wanted to have it partly done, rebarreled to 338 Federal. And then some type of quarter rib to put a scope on, sight. And so that's different. I had read about the formation of the guild. I think it formed in '83, if I recall. Back in those years, a lot of publications. John Amber was big on his annual publications, of course, rifle and hand loader. So the word got out. The guild had formed, and this is what it's about. I think I'd even written and got some information about it, so I was aware of it, knew what was going on. And so when Herman Waldron came up to me at the Seattle NRA convention, he came up to my side, so I couldn't see his name badge. But he wanted to see these guns. He wanted very pointed questions about metal, and metal only. Even though I'd done the stock work, I'd done everything, but I had to build trigger guards. They had Tang safeties added to it. They were milled octagon barrels of integral quarter ribs. So he was asking me all these very pointed questions, and after about 10 minutes, he turns to me to where I can read his name badge and introduces himself. And that's where I had really chuckle, because I knew who he was already. He went to school with my great uncle. And once I explained that my mother's family had grown up in Pomeroy, we got along excellently after that. So yeah, there was a story behind that. At the same meeting, Boots Obermeyer was trying to get a barrel guild started. There was about 12 or 13 of them meet right beside where the guild had their booth. And my father had a reborn and rifle machine at that time, so we were in on that meeting, and I was kind of standing there listening to what was going on, the talk, because the guild had 2 or 3 tables displayed. So Morris Otmar was there, Herman was there. There was a half dozen guys that I had known through reading about them and whatnot that were there at the NRA convention. So I looked at it more of an honor to being asked to join at that time. No formal training. Follow my lines of my father. He was always a mechanic. And again, you wind up buying a piece of machinery, and you learn by the school hard knocks how to operate the piece of machinery to get the final part that you wanted. I have enough scars on my hands to prove it. So yeah, the other thing was I was a voracious reader. So every time the Guns Digest come out, I'd be reading it. And my father had an extensive library of gun-related books. And that's what I did as a teenager growing up, was read books. And every time a new one come out, I'd go buy it. So that was my formal training. I enjoy doing what I do. I feel very blessed to be able to be self-employed for so many years and actually work on something I enjoy doing. When we were making a lot of these custom parts in the 80s and 90s, the bookkeeper at that time, she went and bought a world map, put it on the wall. And we were able to export back in those years. We had exported custom parts to 23 countries over about a 10-year span. That's satisfying in itself. We actually sold a lot of parts into Germany, which was even more surprising and satisfying, that we were selling parts to Hartmann and Weiss, Recknagel. In England, Holland to Holland, John Rigby was a big buyer, and a couple of the smaller ones. Here in the States, Griffin and Howe was always buying a lot of band ramps, and I was making scope rings for them too, still do. Still make parts for them. So slowly by slowly, the word got out that this guy makes some really good parts, and I'm good at it, and I enjoy making the parts. And that, of course, then carries over into the custom metal work and the guns. So this rifle here was built the summer of 1986. I completed it in October of 1986. Again, this goes back to a time period that you couldn't buy very many parts. The rear swivel, it was built by Pete Gristle. The grip cap is a 2-screw Jerry Fisher. Caliber is 9.3 by 62. It has a 5-shot magazine, but with a German release on the hinge foreplate. I had to make the complete trigger guard. It has one of my first 3-position Mauser safeties on it. The customer surprised me when he sent the scope. It's a 30 millimeter Kales. And I'm like, oh no. In 1986, where could you get 30 millimeter rings? And he wanted detachable rings. So I wound up making a set of Kimber type detachable rings for it. And again, 9.3. Not many barrel makers available. Schillen was not doing 9.3. Douglas was not tooled up yet. Krieger wasn't even around. So, but the few that was available was C.P. Donnelly down in Grants Pass, Oregon. So that has a Donnelly, got a blank from him. It has an Integral machined quarter rib. And we come to the front ramp. Again, I could have ordered something from Recknagel if I had read fluent German. You would have had an order from Germany. So I wound up making the whole front ramp. This was in 1986. It just come back to me for some restoration work, because there's been some parts been taken off by the second or third owner. But what's interesting is the original owner. In 1985, there was a small article about me making guns in one of the publications. Get a phone call from Hank Williams Jr. This is the rifle I built for him in 1986. And it has held up very well over the years, as far as condition-wise. And it's kind of an honor to go through and do just a little bit of restoration to it. After Al Beeson passed away, I realized that so many of the old masters were disappearing. So I started what I called informational emails. As I was doing various work in the shop, both on the commercial parts and the custom parts, I'd be taking pictures. I accumulated an email list, and I would send short articles out with pictures describing this and that. And that worked into one year I had 4 98 Mauser actions in the shop to convert to 404 Jeffrey. So that email articles was very extensive. I think it was 19 or 21 different emails with pictures. Over the years, I have lost a computer to ransomware, lost an email system, but those articles were saved by 2 of my friends. And one friend has been working with me to compose it into a manual. So we're at the rough draft stage now. Still doing a little bit of editing, but that's almost done, ready to go. I want to continue doing these emails, especially the more custom parts and custom work I do, which, again, we're losing the old masters. We need to get that information out there to the general public and prospective guild members. I would like to thank my parents and my wife for their encouragement, support, and patience.